For 3 years, I worked at a state forest in Idaho. We were close enough to the mountains to have a decent number of visitors in the summer season. I enjoyed it for the most part. I was big into hiking and backpacking, so it was nice to work a job where I could enjoy those things in my spare time and not to have to travel too far. We had a ranger station right at the edge of town. I had to split my time working there at the front desk with working the outdoors. Working at the station wasn't bad or anything. For the most part, it was just handing out maps of hiking trails and local campgrounds to tourists, but I much preferred to be outdoors. The incident happened in the fall, just as we were headed into the off-season. Several of our other seasonal staff had gone back to college for the year, so we were left with a bare-bones crew. That day, I was tasked with doing some maintenance in the primitive campgrounds. That generally consisted of checking the grounds, making sure any campers have their food stored properly in bear lockers, and cleaning up the restrooms. These campgrounds had no electric, no running water, and obviously no showers. There were bathrooms in every one, but they were vault toilets. Usually we worked in teams of 2 for bear safety, and because it was much faster. Katie was scheduled to be my teammate for that day, but she called in sick. We were already short-staffed and behind on some things, so I decided I'd just work by myself that day. Katie and I could typically get all the campgrounds done before 1 when we worked together, so I figured I could have it all done by myself by the end of the day at least. But I had grossly overestimated myself. I was on the very last campground just as it was getting dark. I knew I should have probably called it and finished the last campground a different day, but I was almost done. The campground was empty when I arrived, not too unusual for the fall season. It was beginning to get cold at night, and the sun set ungodly early this time of year, so campers were few and far between. I didn't have much to do at this campground. All the campsites were clean. The last thing I had to do was a quick wipe down of the vault toilet and restock the toilet paper. Cleaning the vault toilet was probably my least favorite part of the job, but I just held my breath and did it. So here I was, wiping down the floor of this toilet, when I heard a clicking sound, and then I heard someone calling my name. I stopped dead. I knew I was the only person there at the campground. I stepped outside of the bathroom and took a look around, but I was right. There was no one there. I figured I'd had a long day and maybe I was just hearing things. I went back into the bathroom to finish my cleaning, and as soon as the door fell closed behind me, I heard the clicking sound again. It sounded like it was coming from inside the bathroom, but there was nothing there. Vault toilets are literally just a tiny room with a toilet seat over a pit in the ground. And then I heard my name again. It sounded like Katie, and this time she was calling for help. I knew it couldn't have been Katie, but I ran out to my truck, and again, I was the only one there. I checked my phone. Maybe I accidentally dialed her number, and that's what I heard, but there was nothing out of the ordinary there either. I definitely knew there was something wrong here, but I didn't know what it was. I decided to head back to the ranger station. I could clean the bathroom a different day. I went back into the bathroom to get my cleaning supplies and get out of there. I was packing up and I heard my name again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from the pit beneath the toilet. Now I knew for a fact that Katie wasn't down there, so I don't even know why I looked, but I had to look. I guess I expected to find nothing, to hope it was just my brain playing a trick on me. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and lifted the lid. I heard the clicking noise again, and as I looked down the pit, there were eyes staring up at me, reflecting silver back at the light. I know it's not unheard of for animals to fall down vault toilets if the lids are left up, or they aren't enclosed in a building. But animals can't mimic human voice, and the thing looking up at me was definitely not an animal. I didn't get a good look at its face because I slammed the lid closed and ran out of there and locked myself in my truck. What I can describe of it was pale skin. It looked white, like bone white, and it was skinny. It definitely had arms and hands like a person. Its eyes looked even bigger than human eyes. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know what it was. I quit the job the next day and called up Katie and told her that she should quit too. November 21 in New Jersey is like Christmas. Everyone's excited and chomping at the bit to get out into the woods. Hunters are up before the crack of dawn, getting into the woods to try and get the first buck of the season. I'm one of those people that starts to act like a crazed psycho when it gets close to the start of hunting season. I pull out all of my gear and make sure it's all set. I probably clean my rifle 3 or 4 times. I don't sleep the night before. I just love hunting and can't wait for it to be the time of year to head into the woods. This past year, I saw something really, really strange. I don't know what it was really, but I've definitely never seen anything like it. The day I saw it was opening day, the first day of deer season. I usually hunt on public land, even though it's kind of crowded. I was down in the Pinelands, at a spot I'd scoped out. I already had my tree stand set up. I was out there before it was light, trying to get a buck as they appeared in the dawn. I usually alternate between watching the woods with my naked eyes and looking in the scope. You can see more stuff with the naked eye, but you can see clearer in more detail through the scope. When I'm not looking in the scope, I'm just looking for motion, looking for something to appear out of the trees. You end up spotting a lot of squirrels and some rabbits. I'll often see a doe or a little buck wander by, which is always disappointing. Whenever I spot the deer shape emerging from the underbrush, my heart starts to hammer and I get pumped for the kill. But then you see it's a doe and you have a rush of disappointment. Well, this past year I was out and I wasn't seeing any animal life at all. Not a single squirrel or rabbit. There weren't even really birds in the trees. It was extremely quiet, and I was straining my ears to try and listen for anything moving through the woods. Eventually, I did hear something. It was the snapping of a stick, pretty far away. I swiveled a little in my deer stand and brought up my rifle scope to look through. I scanned the woods the best I could, alternating between the scope and no scope. I strained my eyes hard to try and see something. I was about to give up when I heard another sound, like another branch snapping. I looked in my scope again, trying to find it in the trees. This time, I did finally spot something, but it wasn't a deer. It was hard to make out because of the trees and the dense autumn foliage. There hadn't been a strong enough cold snap to make the leaves fall yet, so there was still a lot on the branches. Through my scope, I could catch glimpses of the creature. It was very tall. At first, its height made me excited because I thought maybe it was a buck with a huge set of antlers. It didn't have antlers, but it did have horns. They were like long, curving goat horns, probably a little longer than a foot. The top of its head, where its horns were, was the first thing I caught a glimpse of. I didn't really see its face at all, but I could see other parts of its body when it stepped between 2 trees. It had 2 big wings instead of arms. The wings weren't feathered, otherwise I might have thought this was a super weird crane or something. The wings were big and black and leathery looking. Between the long goat horns and the wings, I knew for sure this wasn't a deer, and it definitely wasn't normal. It was near the end of my scope range, probably 450 yards, so I don't think I was afraid of it seeing me. I watched it in my scope for several minutes until I couldn't follow it anymore in the underbrush. When I think back on this whole experience, it feels like it explains why I didn't see a single deer that day. In fact, I didn't see a single other animal. No squirrels, no birds, no rabbits or raccoons, nothing. The woods were dead silent, and it seemed like something evil hung in the air. I left the tree stand around noon. I was texting with a buddy afterwards about what I saw. He didn't really believe me. I ran into an older hunter back at the parking lot where I'd left my car. He was going to set up for an evening hunt. I told him what I saw, and he immediately started packing his stuff back into his truck. He said there was no point going out into those woods to hunt. He said that the lack of any animals at all was a perfect sign to go somewhere else. He said it must have moved its territory and it was best to steer clear of this land for the rest of the season. He said it wasn't worth the risk. He seemed to act like our lives were in danger. I don't know what it was, and he wouldn't tell me. but he seemed really spooked by it. I've listened to his advice since then and haven't gone back to that section of public land. Based on what that old hunter said, it wasn't worth risking a closer encounter. For most of my life, I honestly found the idea of the paranormal to be kind of ridiculous. I'm a proud atheist, so believing in supernatural things is kind of contradictory to my beliefs. That said, sometimes things happen that are truly nuts and truly unexplainable. This is what happened to me. When I was fresh out of college, I got this really good job in Baltimore. Maryland's a really nice place, and to this day, I think the city's reputation is pretty unnecessarily bad. The job I landed was at a marketing firm, which meant my salary was good enough for me to be able to move into an apartment of my own. That said, my savings meant I could only get the worst apartments the city had to offer. I say worst with a grain of salt, because the area I got the place in wasn't half bad. It was just really dingy and really small, and also ridiculously old. The elevator was there purely for decorative purposes, and my landlord could not physically care less about all of my half-broken appliances. Still, though, the place was my own, and it was something I could be proud of. I had a few friends in the city, so I wasn't too lonely, and I finally stood on my own 2 feet. All in all, everything was initially going exactly the way I planned. Then, of course, the weird shit began. A few weeks into my living there, I realized that my heating is totally busted. The apartment was freezing cold constantly, even though it was practically the middle of the summer. This pissed me off, mainly because I hate the cold, but what really got me was that my landlord insisted the heating was completely up to date, that there's nothing that should be wrong with it. Truth is, when I checked the heat, it would be on. It would be on the highest setting most of the time, but still nothing. It was shitty but livable. I carried on. The next issue, the much bigger issue, was that a lot of my valuable stuff started going missing. Some books of mine, even one that I knew I was currently reading, knew was sitting on my bed, disappeared out of thin air. Then came other things, stuffed animals from my childhood, even my keys at one point. They'd all be missing for a few days and then turn up in the most random parts of the house. Made me think I was just losing it. This continued for a while, and I tried my best to ignore it until I didn't have another option. That feeling, being out of options, came when I was woken up one night. Right in the middle of the night, I want to say around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sounds of giggling in my room. I was only half convinced because I thought maybe it could have been part of my dream that continued a bit into my waking up. But then, I saw some of the creepiest shit in my life. I turn, looking towards the door that went into the hallway, and I see a small shadowy figure staring back at me. I don't have sleep paralysis or anything, I could move. But knowing that I was really seeing this, and there wasn't anything physically wrong with me, made it more scary. The figure didn't have much of a hard outline. It didn't move or anything. It sort of just stood there, looking at me, with these glowy eyes. I reached over to grab my phone, call someone for help, but when I turned back towards the door, the shadow was gone. I naturally laid awake for the rest of the night. The next day, I did something I wasn't proud of. I found a psychic online. There are, surprisingly, a lot more out there than you'd think. My first thought was, that can't be a lucrative business. But then I realized that if I'm calling them, other people probably are too. Truth was, I was starting to get extra freaked out. Even though I didn't see the figure again, waking up in the middle of the night became an unfortunate routine of mine. My stuff kept going missing, my apartment was still freezing, and I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder in my own home. After I accepted this descent into madness, I paid the lady a couple of $100 to come and cleanse my apartment. The experience was definitely odd, but something I will say is that a psychic is nothing if not charismatically persuasive. This lady had me convinced that my place was haunted, and even though I was only half buying it, I knew this was my last option, and that I was better off safe rather than sorry. The thing that really sold me was that when she said she sensed a presence, I asked her what kind. She responded that whatever it was innocent for an entity, that if it was a ghost, it was likely a child. That kind of made everything click for me, because based on the shadow I saw, which was certainly kid-sized, mixed with random giggling and the specific objects that kept going missing, it sort of all added up. As much as a situation like this could have made sense, it surprisingly did. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly what this lady did, but whatever it was, it worked. She burned some stuff, said some things, whipped out her Bible, and that's honestly all she wrote. Not only was everything back to normal, but since then, I haven't had anything similar happen to me again. I could have been foolish. This lady could have robbed me blind with some nonsense, but at the end of the day, I was thankful for the peace of mind.